Hi again. The video that I'm doing today is one that I had intended to do last week, but given the events in Manchester, I didn't really feel it was appropriate. So instead I'm going to do it this week. What I'm going to do is talk a little bit about what happened when my daughter Eloise was born. To give you a bit of background though, my son was born after 23 hours of labour. We had him in a birthing centre. It was entirely midwife led. It was beautiful and perfect. I mean, long and tiring and painful, but it was beautiful, and we got to lie on a bed, all three of us, and have really quiet time afterwards, and we went home and everything was great. Then we come to my second labour with Eloise, and I actually was induced with Eloise at 37 weeks because she'd stopped moving, and there was no sort of discernible reason why she'd stopped moving. She just had, and she hadn't entirely stopped, but her movements definitely slowed. So I was induced. That took a week, and then they forcibly broke my waters. And then the contractions started, but they didn't really get going very well, so I had to be given hormones to help get the contractions really revved up. Now, if you've ever been through that process, you'll know that it is one of the most excruciating ways to go through labour, because they do basically ratchet it up just as you think you're getting used to the pain and getting used to sort of in the rhythm of the contractions, and you've got your gas and air going, which is what I had, and then they ratchet it up, and then the next contraction you get is more painful than you ever thought possible, and it's insane. It's absolutely insane, and it's traumatizing in itself. Yeah, it was really bad. And then at about 1:30 in the morning, I felt the absolute need to push. Now, if you've ever given birth, you'll know that feeling. You'll know that. In fact, if you've ever needed to do a really big poo, you'll know that feeling. It's a very similar sort of like urgent, like, oh my God feeling. And I had it, and you know, I'd had a child before, I recognised it. I was like, yep, this is it. Now I was in a lot of pain at this point. I was still only on gas and air, which is all I ever had with Rufus. So, you know, it was my plan to do a similar thing again. And the midwife was like, okay, well, you know, if you're ready. And bear in mind that at this point, my husband is asleep on the floor, or at least trying to be asleep on the floor, and is not involved in this at all. And the midwife said, yep, okay, if you feel like you need to push. So, you know, a few times around with contractions, I would push on the contraction and nothing would happen. And the midwife's looking and she's like, there's nothing going on. So she, you know, had a feel. And at this point I was 6 centimetres. So for those of you doing maths out there, you need to be 10 centimetres dilated to push. I was 6. I mean, I had 4 more centimetres to go. I had this much space to go. And it was not happening. And what was going on was that Eloise's head was really, really low, which made it feel like I needed to push, but I wasn't actually ready to push. My body wasn't ready, and it would have basically ripped me to shreds had I tried. Now, the advice at this point that is given to you is, on the next contraction, instead of pushing, as every part of your body is telling you to do, you have to engage your brain and go, nope, and hold it in. It is so painful. I've never experienced anything as painful as this. I hope to never experience anything as painful as this ever again. I can't even describe to you how painful it was. And up until that point, I had been pretty calm. I'd been pretty good with the gas and air. I'd been making the same sort of moaning noises that I made in my first labour. So it was, you know, it felt kind of normal, but I could not take this pain. And the midwife came up to me and she said, I think you're going to have an epidural. I think we're at that point now. I don't think you're going to make it if we don't. So I had to give in and say, yep, okay, let's have an epidural. Anyway, midwife goes off to get the anaesthetist. The anaesthetist is in surgery, and because it's the middle of the night, there is only one on call at the time, so we were going to have to wait. We were going to have to wait 40 minutes. That's a long time when you're in that much pain. And so I just said, okay, we'll wait. And remember, all this time, every time I'm having a contraction, you know, pretty frequently at this point, I'm having to hold my child in. And so at some point during this time, my husband felt the need to remind me, Jen, you can't push. At which point the exorcist moment happened. You know, I was taken over by some sort of demonic possession, and it was, I'm not pushing. And I've never heard my voice like that before, and I've never felt my body move so angrily towards my husband, but it did in that moment. And it is something we laugh about now, but at the time I think we were both quite shocked. Anyway, a little while later, maybe half an hour later, I just remember having this overwhelming urge again to push, stronger than the first time. And I just said, it's coming, she's coming, she's coming, I can't stop, it's coming, it's coming. And she fell out of me, so I didn't even really push. She just sort of fell out on a contraction. And the midwife was so shocked, and because I'd been induced, I was hooked up to this machine that was, you know, tracking her heartbeat, and because it all happened so quickly, there was no time to prep the machine or anything like that, so the machine sends off this alarm that the baby is in distress or has died, because it can no longer find the heartbeat. So then you get people kind of rushing in the room, and they're going, oh no, it's fine, there's just a baby that's just come out really quickly. But it was such a shock, and it was such an overwhelming, almost out-of-body experience to just drop a baby, which is essentially what it felt like, just going, and there she was, that it went into shock. And I was really shaking, and I couldn't contain it. I don't know if anyone here has ever experienced shock before, but it's a very weird feeling where you can't really keep your body still. It's sort of, your mind is telling you, you need to take a deep breath, you need to calm your hands, calm your arms, but you can't, and it's a very weird sensation. And so, you know, you get handed your baby straight away, skin to skin, get that baby on your chest, and I couldn't hold her. I couldn't hold her, and there's a few photos from that moment, and I can't look at many of the photos from the birth and the following days, just because it's a bit too emotional for me, but I just remember not being able to hold her properly, and not really wanting to either. I didn't feel like her mother. It was a really strange distance that I felt immediately, which I hadn't had with Rufus. And this is the thing, they always tell you, they are different, the children are different, the births are different, you shouldn't compare, but you do, you're a human being, you compare experiences, and this was just so different, and I was in such a weird mental space at this point. And since this all happened, I also have found out since that I actually lost quite a lot of blood, so I was in quite a bad state. And I handed her over to Nick, and I said, you've got to hold her, I can't hold her. And then at one point she was handed back to me to feed, so I fed her briefly, and then I handed her back to him. She wasn't that interested in food at the time. And then I was passing in and out because of, you know, the loss of blood and the shock, and just the fact that it was the middle of the night and I was tired. And I just remember coming to ever so slightly and hearing that her breathing wasn't right. Hearing that it was sort of staccato, like a really weird rhythm, and sort of weird sort of moaning noises and whining noises she was making, and it just didn't sound right. And I remember thinking, I need to say something because my baby's not breathing, and I need to say, but I couldn't get the words out. I couldn't even really properly open my eyes. And I just remember, and this is something I've only remembered relatively recently, this feeling of helplessness, that I could hear that my baby was struggling to breathe and I could do nothing. I could do nothing to talk about it, to mention it, to say to someone, please realise that my baby is struggling right now. Anyway, to me it felt like hours later, but I think it was really only a few moments later the midwife noticed and went over to Nick and said that breathing's not right. And they called the doctor in, and the doctor assessed her, and she had fluid on the lungs. And I don't remember that. I vaguely remember the doctor being in the room, but I don't really remember being told anything. It sort of comes back in flashes, but it's not a very consistent memory. It's all a bit hazy. And at some point I passed out. And a while later, enough later that it was now light outside, I came to, and there was no one in the room. There was no doctor, there was no midwife, Nick wasn't there, and more importantly, my baby wasn't there. And the last that I could remember was that she wasn't breathing properly. And so my straightaway thought was that my baby had died. And that's a terrible feeling. It's a really horrible feeling. And I don't think in real time it lasted very long, but in my head it lasted a long time. It lasted longer than the knowledge of her being okay. If you see what I mean, I found out that she was okay, but the feeling of her not being okay lasted for months. The feeling that I'd lost her, that she had died, lasted for months, and at times still hits me every now and then. Anyway, Nick came back in the room and he explained that she was in intensive care, that she was calm now, and that I would be able to go see her soon. At this point I still couldn't stand up, I was very weak. But eventually I was put into a wheelchair and taken to see her. And my little baby, my beautiful girl, was in an incubator, which to me, in that mindset that I was in, and in that moment, she was in a little plastic coffin, and she was so still. She was so still and she was so quiet. And it was one of the worst moments of being a mother of my whole life, really. My little girl was in what looked like to me a plastic coffin. And they came, they spoke to me. I have no memory as to what they said at that point, but they spoke to me. I got to put my hand in the little bed and stroke her, which was, even now, is one of the first memories I have of actually touching my daughter, which is such a strange memory to have, such a strange first contact to be. I mean, it wasn't actually my first contact, but in my mind it so strongly is. And I changed her nappy, and then they gave her to me to feed again. And she fed for a while. She ate a lot. And then I had to leave her there. And I had to just walk away. No, with my son, I never left him. I kept him by me for days before I walked away from him. And by the time that my daughter was 12 hours old, I had spent perhaps a total of 2 hours with her solidly, actually consciously with her. And a couple of days later, once we were reunited, but we were still on the ward, we weren't able to go home because she clearly had some kind of infection. It was told to us that she had something called strep B, which we had never heard anything about. before. It's not something that was mentioned to me by any midwife or doctor during my pregnancy, during either of my pregnancies, and it turns out that it's actually really common. Strep B lives in all of us, everybody's got it in the gut, and in some cases it can pass through to the vagina, and then when the baby is born, that's how they contract it. But it is actually one of the few infections that can pass through the membrane, and they can contract it whilst they're in the womb, which is probably what happened, which is probably why she stopped moving as much. And it can be fatal, and it can cause bacterial meningitis, and which in itself can be fatal as well. Now, we were incredibly lucky, and we got to bring our baby girl home a week after she was born. She was able to come home. But that was the longest week of my life, and not one that I like to think about, but one that is constantly in the back of my mind, permanently in the back of my mind. And every time my daughter gets a cough or seems out of sorts, my brain goes there, and I can't help it. And I want to help it. I don't want to be that mother that's completely consumed by that. But it's a terrible, terrible thing. It was one of the scariest things that I've ever gone through. And I hope that anyone who has gone through something similar can try to deal with it, can try to talk about it to people. I think that's so important. And it took me a long time to get to that point, to be able to do that. I blamed myself immediately, and I still do at times. Because not only did she contract the infection from me, but I wasn't able to say that there was something wrong with her as soon as I knew. I couldn't, in that moment, I couldn't do it. And I also couldn't be with her when she was transferred to the neonatal care. I was stuck in a room being weak and pathetic, and the compassionate side of me knows that that's not quite how it was, but the guilty mother in me can't help but feel that way. I don't know if I will ever get over entirely the birth trauma. But I have, over time, managed to get past a lot of the guilt and to get a close bond with my daughter. Because for a while there, I kept her at a full arm's distance, because I just couldn't deal with the pain I felt over her birth. I couldn't, it sounds silly, but I couldn't look her in the eye. I was so ashamed. But all of that is for another day. Today I just wanted to talk a little bit about the actual birth itself. And I'm sorry if it's long-winded. It is long-winded. But it's a hard story to tell. It's a hard story to say succinctly. It's a hard story. Anyway, I am one of the lucky ones, and I know that. And I send my love to all parents out there who have experienced any kind of trauma with their child. It's truly a terrible, terrible thing.